Welcome back. This is MEE's Lives Deep Dive, where we dive into a story shaking up the world. And here's a question. Has Silicon Valley sold its soul to the military-industrial complex? It increasingly appears the days of ethical tech companies promising a better, safer world are long gone. And Google, who once enshrined the mantra, "Don't be evil," into its manifesto, is at the center of it all. On Tuesday, we heard from Microsoft employees who staged a daring protest at the company's 50-year anniversary celebration. You may have seen the footage. AI engineer Ibtihal Abu Said told us how the tech giant is helping Israel surveil and translate conversations by Palestinians in Gaza before they're targeted with airstrikes. But Microsoft is just the tip of the iceberg. A growing number of tech workers inside the world's most valuable companies are speaking up, risking their careers to highlight what they say is a growing ties between big tech and Israel's high-tech war in Gaza. One of the biggest and most secretive of these is Project Nimbus. We first caught wind of it back in 2022, when Amazon and Google staff began raising the alarm about a $1.2 billion contract between those two companies and the Israeli government. The contract gave Israel's army access to the state-of-the-art cloud services and data centers built specifically to help it monitor the West Bank and Gaza and carry out military strikes efficiently. Last year in May, Google cloud engineers disrupted a conference in New York held by Barak Regev, Google Israel's managing director. Have a listen.
I'm a Google Cloud software engineer, and I refuse to build technology that powers genocide, apartheid, or surveillance. Project Nimbus puts Palestinian community members in danger. I refuse to build technology that's going to be used for cloud apartheid. No cloud for apartheid. No tech for apartheid. Free Palestine.
Google is complicit in Israeli genocide.
By the way, those two engineers that you saw in the video, as well as dozens of others who took part in these protests, were all fired. So why does Israel's army actually need state-of-the-art data centers anyway? Well, it's increasingly using AI technology in its targeting of airstrikes in Gaza. Last year, investigations by The Guardian and 972 magazine uncovered Project Lavender, an AI system designed by Israeli intelligence unit 8200. Its job is to scan Gaza and highlight thousands of potential targets at much faster rates than a human being is capable of. This is because Israel was bombing Gaza so frequently that it was running out of targets. Now, to tell us more, we're joined now by MEE investigative reporter Arib Ullah. Arib, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, Mohammed.
Now, let's start with a basic question. What can you tell me about Project Nimbus?
Project Nimbus was actually established in 2021, and it's a partnership between the Israeli government, Google, and Amazon. And it's a project that's worth approximately $1.2 billion, which isn't a lot for companies like Google and Amazon. And it's designed to basically provide cloud computing services for the Israeli government. Now, this is really important because the Israeli government is obviously comprised of a number of branches: judiciary, finance ministry, the army, the Shin Bet, Mossad, etc., etc. But the way this deal was even announced to the public was very vague. And that's what made a lot of human rights activists quite concerned about this project, what it is, what it stands for. And what's really interesting is that we've only really found out about what Nimbus does or what it may or may not be doing through leaks from Google employees, from reports like you mentioned by 972 magazine and The Guardian. So yeah, there's a lot of secrecy around this project, and it's still a bit unclear as to what exactly Google and Amazon are providing to the Israeli government.
Now, $1.2 billion, as you mentioned, is not a lot when it comes to the size of these companies.
No.
But for me and you, it's quite a considerable amount of money. And certainly for a contract with a government, it kind of hints at quite a lot that they're providing in exchange. And I understand that we don't know an awful lot about what is being offered, but what when it comes to cloud services and data centers that Google and Amazon specialize in, what exactly do we believe that these are being used for in Israel?
I mean, one thing that we do know is that Project Nimbus is geared towards providing cloud computing services specifically for machine learning and artificial intelligence. And one thing that's becoming more clear is that Google is now shifting its business model towards more defense contracts in particular, and it's computing, right? It's a space that's in heavy competition with the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, etc. And Google at the minute is perceived as effectively losing the AI battle when it comes to these kind of services. So what Google has basically been doing for the last few years has been playing catch up to try and compete with its rivals. And one of the ways it does compete with its rivals is by acquiring smaller companies or companies that are perceived to be smaller to then be swallowed up into the kind of Google kind of infrastructure. So I know you're probably going to ask me this question already, but for example, earlier this year, Google acquired a company called Wiz. Wiz was acquired for 32 billion. And when I spoke to my sources inside Google, I think one of the first things they said to me was, that's a lot of money.
It's actually the biggest acquisition in history, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And even employees within Google who aren't really sympathetic to this cause, especially in terms of Google acquiring defense companies or companies that have a specialism geared towards the defense industry, even they were saying this is an awful lot of money. And when I spoke to human rights activists and researchers who focus on this area, for a lot of them, what they were saying was, this is also a sign of Google's desperation in trying to compete with its rivals in this space. And that acquisition was definitely an intent, you could argue, from Google's point of view, of saying that we're here to stay and we're willing to put as much resources as possible in making sure that happens.
What is happening to the employees who have been raising these issues with the company?
So I know that Arib and others, MEE, have been speaking to a lot of these employees over the last 2 years and publishing a lot of really fantastic work from them. And what we've been hearing over and over again, this again, similar to the story that we heard on Tuesday with those Microsoft employees that spoke up, is that within the current infrastructure of these companies, there is very little avenues to actually be able to speak up, even though they're told constantly over and over again by HR departments, by their bosses, that this is a friendly environment, that any kind of critique is welcomed and actually encouraged. But what they find is when they actually speak up, either their voices are shut or they're sidelined, and then ultimately, as Arib has been finding out, they have been forced to take their grievances public. Arib, I believe you're back with us now.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay. So you were interrupted before, but you were telling us about some of these employees that you've been speaking to inside Google.
Yeah, I mean, these employees have been trying to voice their concerns internally for months now. And what's really interesting is, I mean, the best way to describe Google as a company is as if it's like Google tries to market themselves as being like university campus, where you can voice your concerns, voice your issues within open meetings that they typically have periodically throughout the year inside Google. And you've not only got physical meetings, but you also have online forums within Google, where Googlers, as they call themselves, try and raise these issues within various fora, i.e. through the direct team or through the actual company-wide forums itself. But one thing they've been picking up on is that their messages are being deleted by Google's admins. So Google actually has internal admins like filtering messages to kind of ensure that there's no harassment and it doesn't break HR policies. And when that wasn't working, these activists then decided to turn their activism to the offline world, where they'd actually be trying to speak to their fellow employees. They'd be asking to sign petitions, etc., and also hold physical protests. And those physical protests were met with heavy security from Google itself, to the point that some of them were actually fired the day after. And a lot of these individuals, they never ever anticipate something like this happening to them, because Google, like I said, have always kind of portrayed themselves as fostering an open culture of being willing to listen to their employees and whatnot. But it seems to be that that's not the case anymore.
And do you think that is a change that is happening inside a company like Google, or is it something specifically about these military contracts that these tech giants are particularly sensitive to?
I think it's a bit of both. And the reason I say that is because Google has been changing its own internal policies to try and allow itself to have some cover to actually go and engage these defense contracts. So, for example, a few years ago, sorry, Google had set out these AI principles, and within those AI principles, one of the principles that they actually established themselves was that they wouldn't be using the AI services for defense purposes. But Google recently quietly got rid of that policy itself, and that for me is a big, and for a lot of employees and human rights activists, a big sign of the direction that Google is heading towards. And if I'm very honest with you, for Google as well, defense is where the money is at, and it's always been the case where where the money has been. And we've spoke about the AI kind of like arms race that's been taking place and everything else. And Google is now effectively making a business decision to try and aim towards more defense contracts because they feel that's where the money is at.
Well, very troubling development indeed. Aribullah, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, guys.
And you can read a lot more about Project Nimbus and a lot of the work that Arib and our investigative team does by heading over to our website, middleeasti.net.